Welcome to Beyond Compliance, Enhancing Physical and Emotional Safety in Workplaces for Persons with Disabilities, hosted by Next Step Foundation on this World Day for Safety and Health at Work. 1.6 billion globally live with disabilities, yet in Kenya, only 15% of persons with disabilities are employed. This is exactly what we're going to talk about this afternoon. The question is why, and the answer really is it's not about rules or ramps. It's the silent barriers, the stigma, the burnout, the exclusion. My name is Carla Birnberg, and I'm your moderator, and I'm very excited to be joined by a panel of brilliant humans ready to share and, we hope, shake things up. Allan Maonga will kick us off with a data-driven wake-up call. Mildred Omino will peel back the layers of safety in and out of the workplace. And Stella Tiyoy will show us how to show up at work as your whole self and feel safe doing so. Together, we're going to talk about what it takes to build workplaces where persons with disabilities don't just survive, they are able to thrive. And this isn't really a casual conversation. It's an opportunity for us to come together, innovate, challenge the prevailing wisdom, and learn from the leadership already existing on our panel. So join us as we share practical strategies for aligning your personal environment with your professional environment. Let's begin. Before Allan kicks us off, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists and tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they do before they share the same. Stella, a disability rights advocate and youth engagement consultant at Enable. She empowers young people with disabilities across Africa and represents Kenya in the national women's basketball team. Mildred is the Disability Liaison Officer at the University of Nairobi. She's a thought leader in disability justice and gender equality, pioneering inclusive policies with her lived experience as a woman with a disability. And Allan, head of People, Diversity, and Culture at Next Step Foundation, leverages over a decade of experience to foster inclusive workplaces and has authored the Employer Disability Inclusion Guide and mentors youth with disabilities. Allan will be kicking us off with a keynote that is data-driven and informative.
Thank you, Carla. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. Happy to see all of us on the call. I hope you are having a productive start of the day. Thank you very much for our viewers. Hope you can be able to hear me. Carla, can I hear me? Good, perfect. So when I was preparing for this conversation, I was just thinking top of head, what is it like for all of us to work from the different questions we are working from? Maybe discipline forces, maybe the school. How is it like? How do you feel waking up in the morning and be able to show up at work? I know all of us are in a busy environment where we are being asked to be able to be productive, do more, but then you do more for less. And these are the conversations that now pan out to be able to bring out what do we mean by a safe work environment. I've seen friends, colleagues who sleep in the same room with their devices, which they receive work emails. So you can't keep, you can't maintain your sleep. You have to wake up in the middle of the night just to be able to check on emails. First thing in the morning when you wake up, you take a few calls before you step out of the hall. So by the time you are getting on your way to work, your bag, your rucksack is already half full with these work nuisances. And these are the stressors that lead towards what we call workplace dynamics that leads to, in terms of a psychosocial stressor in the workplace. Statistics from WHO show that 16% of the world population, which is about 1.3 billion, have got persons with disability across the globe. But then the same is very close. If you look at statistics from ILO in terms of mental health, both safety and psychological injuries at the workplace, it puts at 15% across the globe. So looking at Kenya perspective, whereby we have about 24.6 million workers at any given time, then 15% of it is about 3.7 workforce within the country. At one particular point in their life, in their career, they'll be able to face what we call a psychological injury due to their workspaces. So this, in terms of a Kenya perspective and the globe around, we are in a very good space, because everywhere psychological and safety spaces is a buzzword as we speak right now. And all employees require both physical and psychological health and safety workplaces. From a Kenya perspective, we have a number of regulations which control the workplaces, more so to be able to make sure that safety is achieved and the psychological health-being of the employee is achieved. So some of these policies include the OSHA policy. We have a framework from the Ministry of Health in terms of how does a workplace create what we call a mental workplace, more of a caucus to be able to mitigate all this. But what I'm happy more is the recognition that we are putting on the emphasis of psychosocial injuries are real. Are real from the sense that there is not a sign of weakness. So then how do we create a safe nest to be able to have our employees, more so those who are at risk, including persons with disability, how do they be able to voice out and say, hey, this is the stressor point that I am going through, and at what point does it happen? So looking holistically in terms of what are the contributions from the manager perspective, the employee himself in terms of an individual contributor, and the entire organization holistically, what are all these small pieces that we can be able to put together as we mark this specific day in terms of making sure that our participants and employees with disability also are part and parcel of creating a safe and a psychological healthy workplace. And there are many stressors which we all know. Over the period of time since this discussion started, we have seen improved in terms of medical innovations, how to be able to cure. So when we do a lot of sensitization from an employer perspective in terms of training managers how to handle stress and how to create a safe work environment, all these are good initiatives, including creating those employee focus groups. So I am very happy to be part of this. The challenge is still there, and the challenge mostly, as I said before, it is how do we make sure that all employees who are at risk within our respective organizations are well catered for. Back to you, Carla.
I'm going to take a minute because I can see that a lot of people joined us a little bit later. We are here talking beyond compliance, enhancing the physical and emotional safety in workplaces, because today is World Safety and Health at Work Day, and we are exploring, yes, the physical, but also that added layer of emotional safety, as Allan talked about, to ensure that when we bring persons with disabilities into the workplace, we're not just allowing them to exist, we're allowing them to thrive. And again, to quickly reintroduce our panelists, that was Allan Maonga. He's given us a data-driven keynote, and the entire panel now, including Mildred and Stella, who I see on the screen, so I assume all of you do as well. We're going to get into some specific questions for each panelist, talk about this day, talk about their experience, and then I have one overarching question for all of the panelists to answer. I'm keeping an eye on chat, but I'm also looking to the rest of the team if I miss anything, because if time allows, which it should, at the end, we'll look at your questions. So feel free to put those in chat. First up on our panel, Stella, I can see you look back at me. Let's talk emotional safety. Physical safety, we see. Emotional safety, invisible, but very deeply felt. Can you give us an example, not naming names, where there was a workplace failure to address this idea or notion of emotional safety? And it may be because they just didn't know, but give us an example of what you experienced, what that felt like, what it looked like in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Carla, and everyone joining us for that very wonderful introduction. I'm very honored to be part of the panel today to discuss this important discussion, because this is something that will always and will continuously affect us as persons with disabilities in the workplace. So I think it's such a great thing to discuss and try to, champion for better ways to address it. So yes, so coming back to your question, yes, I have encountered such an experience in not just one, but two organizations I've worked in before. When I looked at the physical accessibility aspect of it, I would rate it as, perfect. Everything was perfect. But again, when it came to the emotional and psychological safety, that is where the gap really was, because I feel like the organizations worked more to ensure that the physical aspects of inclusivity were there, but really getting to understand whether the persons with disabilities really felt included in the day-to-day activities within the organization is where really it failed. And so when it comes to psychological and emotional aspects of it's really important, because if it's not looked into, it can really affect the performance of an employee, and in this case the person with disability, because you're not able to perform to the best as you'd have loved to. And this is because sometimes you get treated in a fragile manner, or as it's sometimes called, people walk on eggshells. So how they treat you is in a very delicate way. And I remember even sometimes it would come to even just doing the tasks, people around me, I could feel the energy. They were afraid to either cascade the tasks to me because they felt like it's too much for me, or the way they just like greet me was, it came off slightly different. And this is actually it's part of now the emotional and psychological safety, because again, it affects you. You're like, okay, am I that different? You end up overthinking everything, and this actually affects your performance. So yeah, I guess I'd leave it at that. This is something that I have faced, and I'm assuming I will continue to face, and the reason as to why we are here today to talk about it. And hopefully we have people listening in, and hopefully that this is something that will change as time goes on. Yeah.
And I love your phrase, walking on eggshells, because it's that. I mean, listening to you speak, it's just that sense of, I want to belong like every other team member. And a lot of this ties back into our other panelist, Allan's work of physical safety isn't enough. And because the psychological safety is unseen, did you feel like the organizations you mentioned too really had no idea because they felt like they had done everything by offering you physical safety?
I wouldn't say they did not have an idea. I just feel like people know and are just afraid to address, the issue. perhaps you try to voice it out. You're like, okay, honestly, I feel like that came off a little different, but I feel like they just don't know where to start from. And I think hopefully in our discussion today, we get to discuss what are the best possible ways to try and address such an issue. Where can we start from, and how best can we, approach such situations?
Picking up that thread of they don't know where to start from. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but is there an organization, whether you worked there or not, where you thought, that's innovative, that's the key to the psychological safety that I didn't feel at these other places? Is there anything innovative you've seen?
Still on me, right?
It is still on you.
Oh,
I will
okay.
announce when we are passing the baton.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I've worked in organizations that have also, tried their best to try and, address all the themes when it comes to safety for persons with disabilities. I think I just want to point at one organization where they embraced, it's as little as embracing or recognizing important disability days like the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. It's as little as that, as just, communicating to employees that, hey, you know what, we are having International Day of Persons with Disabilities coming up. Let's gather, let's learn a little bit about disability. I've also been in organizations, I've seen organizations that have disability mainstreaming groups where basically they get to learn about, how best to address persons with disabilities, what are the right inclusive languages to use, how do we basically, so I think it just comes down to the little things like recognizing that, hey, we have persons with disabilities within organizations, what can we do? I've also been in an organization where leaders within the organizations had disability mainstreaming trainings. Again, just for them to get to understand how best to address persons with disabilities. And language is really important. And I know Mildred will agree to that. Language is really important. How you address persons with disabilities is very, very important. So yes.
Thank you for doing my job for me. We are going over to Mildred next. That is very helpful, Stella. And the theme I kept hearing was belonging, but also acknowledging. And the small things add up and layered over time make a big difference in the psychological safety feeling. Turning to Mildred. Thank you, Stella, for that. Physical accessibility can get the spotlight, but emotional barriers can be just as tough. Can you think of, and feel free to go back to the language that Stella brought up, a practice, an organization where you have worked for, or someone that you've witnessed that they've used to tackle both the physical and the emotional at the same time, and it's worked? You are muted.
Cool. Can I be heard now? Thank you. So
Yep.
good afternoon. Yeah, thank you, Carla. Thank you, Stella, and good afternoon, everybody. So I will cue in from where Stella has left, and to start by acknowledging that work is very critical for everyone, but more to people with disabilities. One thing that empowers people is also economic empowerment. And where do we get this? At work. But also get to move out of your room and meet the world and just get out of that isolation, which is also part of the issue that brings about emotional challenges, like when you're constantly not connecting to the world outside you, when you're not connecting to the economic possibilities around you and all the social possibilities around you, I'd say that would disable you more than even the disability that people get to know about. So you rightly put that emotional well-being or is ignored mostly, and safety sometimes is looked at from the perspective of physical spaces or the four-wall corners that we are in the name of offices. But it's also true that since COVID, most of us have moved from those four-wall corners, including the conversation we are having right now that is happening in a virtual space. So really, all these have some emotional connotations, and workplaces that we have, we also must admit that we've inherited a lot of colonial mentalities in terms of how we design and shape the workplace. Like is 8 to 5 p.m. for colleagues in Kenya and other countries, most British colonies, that we are expected to be in these spaces around that time. And joining into that conversation around emotional wellness, most of us are on the compliance lens in workplaces. And Allan spoke well to the statistics and how the laws have really pushed employers to include people with disabilities. But I feel like the policies and the laws have not done a good job in pushing people to be emotionally safe and inclusive. So we still have a lot of bottlenecks to deal with. And I'll just pick an example of the first day at work as a person with disability. And probably you are hired by this big institution, having workforce of hundreds of people, and you walk in and meet the HR specialist, you're assigned that, okay, this is your role, you've signed your contract. So just being very typical of what happens when you're being onboarded as an employee to these organizations. And sometimes it's sort of a dream job that you are looking for, but you get a backlash upon arriving. So you are very excited with that paycheck that you'll get at the end of the month. You're also probably very, very excited about sharing your talents. But then while one door is opened, then the doors for emotional safety quickly closes up for you. And this is a case for many people with disabilities. I was just sharing in an informal conversation of how I got to some workplace sometimes back, and I was very excited, and I was like, wow, this is the time for me to shine. This is the time for me to give back to the community. You know, sometimes we come into spaces with a lot of thirst to give, you know, because as from a disability lens, what people are used to is like people who are really receiving, but then work gives you an opportunity to give. So I was at that point, and then getting in while the facilities were provided, and I was actually in an elevator, so it means I was going to an upper floor with a very good physical safety mechanism taking me to the next floor. But someone made a comment, there must be something that is awkward in this organization. Suddenly, we're just seeing people with disabilities all over the place. So what did that tell me? This colleague was very uncomfortable having persons with disability around. But these are the people you need to work with, coordinate, work with, because again, what employment does to us is that it teaches us to work with different people. Like if I'm in the human resource department, I'm not expected to be closed up there. I need to reach out to colleagues probably in information technology, in hospitality, etc. And
Has Mildred frozen
out
for
publicly
others?
or just sit in your corner in the office. Yeah. So that kind of thing. So that's one of the downside. But I would also speak to the positive side of it, that one of the colleagues that I worked with, a younger person that we connected to a workplace, recently shared that they wouldn't want to leave their organization because they feel like that is like their second home, that they were onboarded nicely, and they feel like they have the opportunity to solutions for work, like they're allowed to already existing in the organization. Shaking a bit. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that. So this young person whom we worked with and was connected to another workplace was like, I am home and I don't need to leave. So it's different experiences for different people and how people are onboarded, but also how people take this challenge. And I think what brings me to this work is some of my first-hand experiences, like how I was I made it a deliberate measure to invest a lot more away from policy to organization culture. How do we move to that space? Like, how do we put more resources into having a culture that is backing up the policies? Yes, we do have the policies, but our culture, how do we shake hands of people that don't look like us? How do we create spaces that allow them to speak their minds in meetings? How do we value what they're bringing to organization without questioning that, would you really take up on this job? How do we invite them to decision-making places where they make decisions and they feel like their inputs are valued at workplace without us questioning that, do you really think that this is the work that was done by Stella? So that kind of question. So we really want to have spaces that allow us to extract as much as we can in terms of the talents that people are bringing, as opposed to looking into the statistics and saying, look, we have employed 20 people with disabilities, yet these people don't show up for work. And if they show up, they do not even speak authentically in discussions because somebody is going to shoot down the points that they're making because they don't look beyond the disability. So a lot of innovation can happen, but it depends on augmenting the organization culture with the policies that we have, because we can have all these beautiful policies. There's the emotional well-being, which heavily relies on the organization culture. We may not be even able to measure that. Are these people really bringing their full self into their workplace? We can count the amount we pay in salaries, but are we able to tell that we are getting the best out of the people, and also we are getting people to grow to the best of their abilities because of the kind of environment that we produce in the workplace? Back to you, Carla. I hope I answered the question.
You did, and a couple of things, I'm not going to go off script, but a couple of things stuck in my head. The story you told, your use of the word backlash, and what sounds like companies who, when they take the approach of I'm checking it off, I'm supposed to have this number of persons with disabilities, and here they are. We're not really integrating them fully into the culture, but we have the numbers. What is the distance, the gap? How difficult is it to go from this backlash, the experience on the elevator, the experience of I'm very excited for this job, and then I realize, oh, I'm not fully integrated. So to go from that backlash to really creating a culture of belonging, is that a huge gap, or is it the small steps that really make persons with disabilities recognize I'm emotionally safe here? That's still for you, Mildred.
Thanks. I would say to me as well. Yes, thank you. I'd say the gap still exists, and I wouldn't say it's a huge mountain to really bring down. It depends on the right attitudes and the commitment. You know, how do we say we are committed to safe workplaces? Do we only rely on the policy papers? How do we make the few employees that we exist feel like they are safe and they are contributing to the broader mission and vision of our respective organizations? So for me, that would be the first questions. And I would say that while these gaps do exist, there are tips that have already worked, like even spotlighting the work that people do, like really acknowledging that they're coming into this space, bringing some credible resource. And to be honest, the greatest resource is human resource. And I know Allan will agree with me. We could be having a lot of financial resources in our respective organization, but these are people driven. They're not really, like, money without people driving that agenda would not make a lot of sense. If you put your dollars in the account or Kenya shillings in the account, but the people who should drive your mission are not getting it completely, I think you will not have an organization right there, in my view. So simple things like, how do we induct employees when they come? And this is not only people with disabilities. Sometimes I feel like there's a lot of effort being pushed towards having people with disability to be in their workplace. I mean, to just move from wherever they are to get into the workplace. But what are we doing with other community? Because they're not going to work in a, I mean, people with disability are not going to work in a disability corner, like I said earlier, that they're going to work with the whole institution. But you've done a good job telling me there is a lift here. This is what our policy says about wellness, and this is what it says about mental health. But you've not connected me with my peers, because I find peer support coming in handy. This is the colleague you'll be sitting with, you'll be exchanging notes. Maybe this is the first person to look at your PowerPoint before your supervisor looks at it and say, hey, maybe if you input this, it would be nice. But if I can't even speak to my colleague and quickly to move away from me, then really it's emotionally disturbing. And that's where you sign a contract, but day two, you are back onto LinkedIn looking for the next available job for you to take. Whereas the others are celebrating you. Mildred, you landed on this good job. But Mildred is very busy applying for the next job because it's simply not working. So it's about the collective care that we get in workplace, that we are able to thrive as a unit. And the values, do we even have like institutional values integrated with personal values? So that's also something. And it will not be written somewhere, really. We'll have our mission statements, our vision statements rightly written in banners. And how do we interpret our value statements as institutions and ensure that we are walking in from different walks of life and bringing in people with different personal values, but aligning them to our institutional values to help us thrive as a unit, you know, that we have certain values that when we walk in, you can say, this person has the aspiration of institution X. And that also has a lot of emotions to put in. How do you show up? When you go for team building, are you building or disintegrating these teams? Like, do you show up in a team where the facilitator is constantly doing exercises that are excluding someone, and this person is quickly waiting for, when are we finishing this team building exercise? When are we going home? So simple things like care, collective care practices at workplaces, simple things like people checking on you. Like, I mean, if you don't show up for work and someone is kind enough to check, how are you doing? And people being generous enough to understand that your 2-hour physiotherapy session might probably require that you have some flexibility to take on some assignments past 5 p.m. and things like that. So some of these practices are really not documented somewhere, but they are the values that we bring into our workplaces. They are how colleagues show up and how we form teams that are solid enough, that make people feel like they are from home to home, not from home to another stay away, you know, and you're constantly waiting for your alarm to remind you that, hey, Mildred, it's about 5 minutes, and you're like, I'm going home, you know. So those kind of things, like organization culture. And I feel like this is what we need to invest more in. And if we know that we have wellness practices and some people are going in for yoga, there are people who might just connect with friends and take lunch together. It might be as simple as that on Tuesday we are having lunch and I get to know something about my colleague which I wouldn't have known if I was in a formal meeting, for example. That we have spaces that people show up in a very authentic way, that if I can tell you that I enjoy taking a banana after my lunch as opposed to an ice cream. But I'll not tell you that when we are doing a very serious presentation to bid for a grant that we need for our organization. But I'll tell you that when we have these social spaces that we are creating in our busy schedule, that we have at least 15 minutes to bond with each other. We have some minutes that are just reserved for play, that it's okay to play with your supervisor and manager for some 10 minutes before you get back to serious stuff. So for me, these practices are the ones that augment the policies to make emotional well-being a reality. Otherwise, we can keep on doing policies every day, and we have a bunch of them in our offices. I mean, we are compliant policy-wise, but are we compliant in terms of emotional safety? I would say no, but I would say it's not a very huge task. I would also say it's not a very huge burden in terms of how much money we are putting in as an organization to ensure emotional safety for all our employees in their diversities.
Wow. It's fascinating to me how you've sort of built upon and echoed what Stella said. I love your emphasis on, because that's also the question that I didn't end up going with, cost, and how you repeatedly emphasized this is connection. It's providing opportunities for connection. It's not a big financial investment. And what Stella was saying about don't walk on eggshells, belonging, see me for who I am, and your continuance of it's not just the policies. And Allan, who is up next, is fantastic at breathing life, as you said, into these checklists, really making them come to life and showing companies it can maybe feel intimidating initially, but building connection, belonging, opportunities outside of the work presentation to say, after my lunch, I'd prefer a banana and I don't do ice cream. These things don't come up naturally during the workday, but they can, thanks to a strong human resource handbook, checklist, or downloadable toolkit, which we will be offering at the end. So I'm going to move it over to Allan and kind of build upon Stella and Mildred. And I'd love for you to address, because this is absolutely the gift you bring to the foundation, policies written on paper can feel kind of antiquated. If you could suggest a kind of big, game-changing, innovative policy that doesn't make a workplace compliant, because most places are, but truly inclusive, what might that look like?
Well, thank you, Carla. Looking at the workplace, because we have different touch points and different policies, about 15, 16, about 20, depending on the size of the organization. So one very key policy would be, of course, safety, which is OSHA. Looking at how you marry it with other policies within the workplace, including the just new mental health and all that from the Ministry of Health. So looking at all these policies, putting them together, and then they bring into or fizzle into one very base foundation called the culture of the organization, which clearly is stipulated on the values that we all bring together from different organizations. So this culture is what you live every day in the morning, you wake up in the morning. Are we the kind of staff base that we are happy when our line manager is on leave and we are quick to say, when is he or she coming back? If there's a trip that your line manager has traveled, then you're quick to ask, When is she or he coming back? Then that speaks to the culture of the organization. So all the policies that we have, including disability inclusion policy, all these are great policies. But then how do we bring them into life? It comes down into the culture. And the culture of the organization is what we practice every day. Are you giving our staff time to be able to unwind and wind during their on and off period? So for example, as internally, we have the flexible working policy. So depending on when you would want to come in, depending on what task you have, depending on who you are collaborating with, and you can quickly be able to use that particular policy. But even that policy aside, if we now bring it into life and we say, let's practice it at a different level, depending on which conditions you are in, then it is very easy for me to be able to say, I work with a Mildred, and I know Mildred is an early person, and Stella is a late person. Then when I will be doing my scheduling of my meetings, then I'll be able to know how do I balance between Stella and Mildred to be on the same meeting. So I bring the culture into life, looking at, I have this work to from home policy, but then how do I marry all this together? Looking at the personality that all of us are bringing together. So culture is very key. The biggest question that I would want to see most of us be able to practice. How do we, some of the other things that we also practitioners is to be able to document in terms of what is happening within the safety and psychological happenings in the organization. But then when we have HR metrics, so we look at gender, we look at the age, we look at the in terms of qualification, but then nobody goes ahead to be able to document and say that on a month-to-month basis, I will be noting down under one column of the HR metrics all the psychological incidences that are happening into the organization. How many stress incidents did we have? How many depressions did we record? So that does not happen. So if we go towards and enhancing the policy, because policies are supposed to be reviewed over a period of time. So looking at our safety policies, looking at our disability inclusion policy, looking at all the policies that we have in the organization in terms of a monetary and looking at how do we progress this policy. Are we able to all collectively as an organization, as a country, be able to say, to be able to manage all groups that we classify and at risk category under the OSHA practice? Are we able to say at the end of the month, from an HR perspective, all the HRs in the country, just to document and say, we would want to be able to document incidences of psychological incidences and be able, how do we track them to conclusion? Then that creates a meaningful path towards closing that particular issue that arises from day to day. Otherwise, we will still be back in this conversation 1 year later to be able to say, hey, we still have accessibility challenges. How are we addressing it? Because these challenges are the ones that are being stress point to one or two, three types of one or two, three employees in the organization. If we talk about communication, what modes of communication are we having? We have many modes of communication. Are we embracing WhatsApp communication? Are you embracing Teams communication? Are you embracing personal communication on some instances? So all this together, how do you embrace all this together? Bringing other policies into place. We have what I like making reference to is bring your own device policy. Reason being, most employers have double speak. So they will tell you, we want to be inclusive. Get us somebody into the organization. But they will tell you, hey, stop. Give us someone who is not on wheelchair, or give us someone who is not using crutches, or give us someone who is not visually impaired. But then, do we have a policy that can be able to say, I don't have the finances to be able to buy a JAWS software, but then if the candidate qualified, has the ability, has got a JAWS software, can we be able to allow the candidate to come, plug and play? So it's very easy. It's just a matter of that organization just looking at their integration internally and looking at their safety in terms of data, and they're able to plug and play. So there are many policies. What is lacking is the goodwill to be able to implement them and run them more of a culture change within the organization. Finally, for it to be able to take off, we need total commitment from top leadership. because it will need policy shift, it will need practice shift, it will also need a lot of budgetary allocation when and where it is needed. So all policies in the workplace are good to be able to make sure that we have safety and psychological workplaces across the globe.
Thank you. And I do actually have a follow-up question, but I'm going to skip to the cross-panel question and come back to that. I want to keep an eye on the chat, put in questions for specific panelists or in general, if you have them, and hopefully we'll have time to get to those at the end as well. Given all three of your unique perspectives, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing, and here we're going to open it up from emotional safety or physical safety, given the special day today, what would you change? No limits. Right now, anything you announced would be implemented immediately. What would that change be in the Kenyan workplace for persons with disabilities? So unmute yourself and jump in. Don't make me call on people.
I want to say ladies first.
And any change, I mean, this is your moonshot to shift the way persons with disabilities are viewed in the workplace immediately.
Yeah, I think I'd go first because Allan has insisted. And yeah, I think if there's one thing that, I'd do or hope that it should be done, as it should in any other organization, is of course starting with, doing an inaccessibility audit or accessibility audit per se, just getting to understand like where are we, right? Yes, we have onboarded persons with disabilities. Do we have the right things in place? Is our onboarding process inclusive, just as Mildred had mentioned? Do we have the right reasonable accommodations to offer them? How best can we make them feel emotionally and psychologically included? So I think that if it were me, that would be the first thing to do, just getting to understand where we are, where do we want to be, and what should we do? Yeah.
Here, struggling to unmute myself and respecting Allan's call for ladies first. So I will go after Stella. So for me is one thing that I would want to work on is if I was to change something, is to go beyond organization, just looking at organization images and reputation, as well as, how do I put it? For example, when you are hiring, I feel like most institutions, organizations are more into, they care a lot about their brand, if you know what I mean. So sometimes they would be hiring just because they want their brand to look good, if you know what I mean, that it's good for my brand that I have 10, 20, 30 persons with disabilities. So my brand would be good in the market, whether it's in the stock exchange or wherever. People will resonate with my brand. And for others, it would be the profit margins, like how much are we bringing in? And I respect all that, depending on the business that organizations do. But I would really love a human-centered approach to hiring, that we are not only bringing in people with disabilities to protect our brand image, but we are also not only bringing in people with disability to ensure that people who care about disability can buy our products, but we are very authentic and very intentional, that even if we are bringing in one person, we've already carefully thought about it. we are also not designing systems without, trying to understand, like, what does it look like for them? Like, how do you thrive as an engineer who probably has a visual disability? So I don't want to be that employer who will go ahead and buy the softwares for you without asking you, like, what really works for you. So for me, something that I would change is that processes that don't only look at employees with disabilities as add-ons, if you know what I mean. They're not add-ons, but they're just part and parcel of our teams, and they're coming in with contributions. I would really invest on processes, policies, practices that ensure that they are not add-ons, but they're part of the workforce, and truly so, that they're able to thrive, they're able to bring in more talent to our team, that we say person X came in, but her strength is on this area, and to help her achieve the best, we have put in these measures. We allow them to take 30 minutes break if that's what makes them perform better, as opposed to the stringent colonial workforce laws. So I would invest more of my resources in that, and augment branding, profitability with true human-centered, inclusive workplaces.
That's the mic drop line, the true human-centered, inclusive workplaces. Building on what Stella said, both of you kind of focused on setting new employees, all employees, especially employees with disabilities, up for success from the beginning and not making it about optics or checklists. So now you, Allan, from the HR perspective, what would you immediately change if you could just make it happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenge out there in general in terms of inclusion of persons with disability into the workplace. And there is fear on both sides. So there's fear from the employer side, there is fear from the employee side. Employee, more so the candidate who is coming on board, and those who are already within the organization. And this fear is the fear of the unknown. So for me, what would really strike me more is how do we give voice and agency specifically for the candidate with disability and the employee already internally in the organization who has got disability and would want really to come to self-identify and self-disclosure. So that would be very key. So most employers would want to start, but then they're fearing, what are the terminologies that can I use to be able to refer to my employee or my candidate? Then those internally, how do I ask for reasonable adjustment? I'm already in the organization. I didn't disclose it when I was coming in. Then how do I do it? So creating a safe nest is what I really would want as a nation, all of us in this call from different organizations. Can we create those safe spaces within our organization that we can all be able to come up and say, hey, this is what I am going through. It may be you as an employee, or you may be a caregiver. But then how do we bring you together to make sure that then we can be able to work all of us together? And this again calls for top leadership. It calls for psychosocial support internally, similar to what we have with the Upili project, just to make sure that, yes, employees can be able to voice and say, this is my current situation, this is what I'm going through. What help is there for me? And then do you have a reasonable accommodation kind of framework? And then for me to be able to work very well, I will need a JOS software. And then where do I get this? Then falling back into a reasonable accommodation framework, then the employee is able to know where to be able to pick this. So then my immediate ask for all of us on this call, different organizations, let's make sure that we go back and be able to create safeness in our organization. Let our employees be able to know where can they be able to ask for urgent help without being victimized, and how can you be able to quickly turn around. So most of these self-nest and request channels should be able to have more of an SLI. How long will I wait for the feedback to be able to come back? So that then the employee doesn't come back 1 month later, no feedback has been given back to the employee. So feedback and feed-forward mechanism is very key in terms of creating that safeness for all of the employees in the organization, so that they can be able to voice and have an agency within the organization. Back to you, Carla.
That's it. And I love the flow, Stella, Mildred, to you. It's set me up for success from the beginning. Do that audit. See me, include me in every way. And then, like you say, agency and a voice. I am going to attempt to look in our chat and see if we have any specific questions for the group. Lots of echoing and applauding with what you all have said. A lot of emphasis from all of you, mostly Mildred and Allan, about the importance of leadership. I love what someone mentioned about, and we touched upon this as well, disability awareness training, making that mandatory for everyone in the organization. Lots of interesting comments in the chat. Safe space at work. Sometimes it can be challenging with the work, the team members that you meet. And because this is actually, and I do think we have a little bit of time, I would love Stella, Mildred to chime in. Is there a sense of, I agree with a safe space at work for persons with disabilities. Sometimes there are challenges at work when you meet your teammates and then you just stay quiet. Curious your experience. If you think this points back to culture, as you mentioned, Allan, any thoughts on that comment in the chat?
That was me.
Really, anyone. It's an interesting remark that what you have all said, especially you, Allan, about it's the culture from the top down impacts how the team reacts. And what do you recommend? Have you, Stella or Mildred, experienced where you get to your new job and the teammates just really aren't that friendly?
Yeah, I guess I'd go first. I have definitely experienced that. But again, at the end of the day, for how long are you going to, try and make them, like for how long are you going to make them, make them reflect the kind of energy you want them to reflect? So I think just do your best, be as confident as you want to be communicative. But again, if you feel like the energy is not being reflected back, it's up to them, really. You cannot do much about it. I believe with time, they will adjust. They may open up to communicate with you more freely, but really there's nothing much you can do about that. I think it's do your best, if they communicate back. Uh, do not be in a corner or like segregate yourself, but just like be open. And then I'm sure with time the energy will reflect back. Yeah, because you cannot force issues again. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Stella. I want to just weigh in on culture. I think that's what I started by saying. And culture is dynamic. Every day things change in our lives, not only from a disability perspective, but in literally everything. And there are things that with time are phased out. And I would believe that we do not have to be very static when it comes to disability inclusive work culture. I know in the past we never used to use artificial intelligence. Today we do. In the past we used to do a lot of writings, and you would take a pen and write. Every profession has changed with time, and cultural practices, traditions have also changed with time. Some because of the external pressures. So I wouldn't want to imagine that this culture becomes only rigid when it comes to, to disability inclusion. So I would believe that the way it has been dynamic is the same way it would be dynamic when it comes to workplace cultures that are inclusive of persons with disability. And for leadership, Allan spoke a lot to this, but I would say the question of walking the talk. Walk the talk as a leader. Like if you're saying we are committed to inclusion, that is the first statement in your policy document. Please start walking that talk, and define, at least unpack what commitment to inclusion means to your organization. So, and it would even help to start thinking through the roadmap to that, to realizing that commitment, because otherwise it doesn't help developing a policy. And 3 years later, there's nothing to even show about that policy apart from filing it with the government that you do actually have it. So walking the talk as leaders is something that we cannot really underestimate. And in terms of fitting into the organization or organization fitting in you, I think it could be two-way. Include me when I come in. I also include you. So let's have a conversation that what adjustments are we making to bring each and every one of us on board, of course, with the sole objective of achieving the organization missions. And there's evidence that people who are supported give their best and they're more productive. So that has to also happen, that we create spaces that allow people to show up fully. And with the time it happens, the first day, obviously, I met someone who said the first time they heard about disability was when they were in a language class, in a literature class in university. So I can imagine how much people take time to get to even interact with people with disability. And that might be different from someone who was raised with a sibling who has a disability. They would obviously be conscious about inclusion. So also acknowledging that we are at different places and being very, treating each other with empathy and being ready to learn and to support each other and just share what actually works. And sometimes that shows up in different levels at workplace. There's this workplace where people were very scared every time they had an employee with disability was coming into their team. But when they met someone else who is different, sometimes people think that people with disability are one homogeneous community, and that is not true. We have all sorts of personality. We have people who are like literally smiling machines, but we have people also who are no nonsense, and it's human nature. So expecting that persons with disability will come into workplace and they show up like exactly like a copyright of person A who you had last year, that is, I think, is just being also mean to realities of humanity. So acknowledging that people come in, just like your other colleagues without disability, they have different personalities. So giving room for these personalities to thrive, to know that an introvert would probably work in their corner and write quietly without interacting with so many people, just understanding that what are the strengths that people are bringing in without pushing them so hard to twist to be what they are not, but harvesting the best out of them and building a culture where we are all able to work together, like we are interwoven, we are this web that helps us to achieve our mission. I think an investment has to be done towards that direction to ensure that we are not constantly trying to define disability from year 1 to year 10 of our organization. At least we should be having some growth as organization, that at least we've moved from the definitions and we've had some clear attribute of what inclusion means to us, because it means different things to different people, but it should be very clear, like what are our values as organization, so that it's not so hard to onboard people with disability, and it's not their job to start, explaining. We already should have like a value system that when I am inducted, those 2 weeks that my HR is inducting me at work, they already tell me about the institutional value. And they already tell me what they think about diversity and inclusion. So when I come back after my induction, I don't look at those who are probably different from me as strangers. But I also don't get surprised when I hear that a colleague has a psychosocial disability and they need some accommodation. I also don't get surprised when I see a sensory room in my workplace that someone would go there for 10 minutes to just rest and come back. I wouldn't be surprised about those things. So during induction, this package should be very, very holistic and also connect people to resources. They should know that if they want to talk to a counselor, a therapist, what do they do? What's the procedure? If they want to take a break, what is the procedure? And what leave options are there? I mean, just make the bulky HR policies simple to understand, just by a very, very simple methodology, so that people don't, again, spend the first year of their employment trying to validate themselves and to show their colleagues that we are here to work. I mean, simplify it for everyone. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love that Mildred has kind of given you my closing. It's the focus on emotional safety. And you actually use this phrase, it's not static, it's a spectrum. And we have gotten so many helpful insights today. There will be a recording up on our Next Step Foundation LinkedIn, which follow if you don't already. We will have a YouTube video of this and also the Inclusive Workplace Toolkit from Allan. And if there's one takeaway, no matter where you work or what your role is, find that one next small idea or suggestion towards creating this emotionally or physically safer workplace for persons with disabilities and pilot it. Give it a shot, and then share it with us at the foundation, because you never know. It might be something that we hadn't thought about yet. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists. We appreciate your time and your insights, and thank you.